Hey Squishies! Back again on another vlog. This is Ducktales, episodes 4 through 6, Beagle Birthday Massacre, Terror of the Terrafermians, and House of the Lucky Gander. And if it's not clear from that list of episodes, I am going by broadcast order with these. So, on some listings I've seen, those aren't the numbers that they're assigned, but that's the order they were broadcast in, and since I'm watching this more or less as it's coming out, that's the order I'm going to be using. So, quite a bit to talk about. I actually kind of saved up for 3 episodes so that I would have a lot to talk about. Jumping right in with the first one, Beagle Birthday Massacre, which of the 3 is probably the one I have the least to say about. Because really this is all about building up to the ending twist, which is about introducing a new arc. Which, okay, great. It looks like a fun arc, it looks like good things will happen, but it's not really what I talk about in these. So, what I am going to throw out there, first of all, is Lena and Webby make a great pair. They play off each other really well, in the sense that Webby has all these physical skills, but is kind of naive and doesn't really get how the world works, while Lena is kind of cynical and jaded and knowledgeable about, street smart kind of things, but lacks Webby's physical skills, so they kind of reinforce each other in that way. The huge army of Beagle Boys we saw here is an old, kind of Ducktales, Uncle Scrooge comics tradition. There are huge numbers of Beagle Boys, but they were generally pretty interchangeable in the original comics. The cartoon gave them a little bit in sense of distinct identities and personalities. So you had Big Time, that was small and a planner, schemer, and leader. Burger, who was big and fat. Bebop, who was, I think was his name was, who was, kind of into music, things like that. There would generally be 3. Big Time was always one of them, which other ones showed up kind of varied a bit. And then, of course, there was Ma Beagle, who was the true leader. Here, they've kind of made there be multiple discrete groups of 3 with different, themes to them. So you've got the main ones, and then you've got the ugly failures, and you've got this and that and the other thing, and that's kind of a cool touch. The clown ones were creepy as hell, though. I did like the whole, how do you defeat an evil clown with a banana peel, because of course they'll find that irresistible. It reminded me a bit of Discworld and the Guild of Fools in Discworld, who are pretty universally despised, and they're basically clowns by the later Discworld books. Initially, they're more like court jester types, but they're basically clowns, comedians, all that kind of thing, but mostly clowns. And there's a whole book that revolves around a murder mystery involving one of them. I'm trying to remember which it is. I think it's Men-at-Arms. It's the one with the gun. And I'm deliberately pronouncing it slightly oddly, because that's how it's written. It's the one with the gun. And in that one, there's all this stuff about how they're so ingrained in the way they think that they can't get outside of it. So a clown's face is the unique style of makeup that he, because they're all male in this guild, he and only he is allowed to have that particular pattern of makeup, and when he dies, it will be, painted on a dummy and kept in the hall of the guild forever, and no other clown will ever be allowed to use it. Well, somebody uses another clown's face makeup, and the clowns can't even tell it's not the same person. It doesn't matter what their build is like or anything like that. They see that pattern of makeup and they immediately assume it's that person because it's so ingrained in them. And that's kind of what's going on here, is they can't not step on the banana peel and fall over. They're clowns. Clowns is their identity. They have to do it. So then, of course, the big thing at the end is that Lena is an agent somehow of Magica Dispel, who is either trapped in her shadow or communicating with her through her shadow. It's not 100% clear which. Which. They also did something that I am not sure if A, this was a mistake, or B, deliberate, and who it was a mistake by. In the closed captioning, when she's doing her little chant to summon Magica, she uses the word arc. Now, she should, in context, be saying A-R-K, an ark as in the kind of ship, Noah's Ark or the Ark of the Covenant or anything like that. It's a container, essentially. It's a vessel that holds and protects and is used to convey something from one place to another, which is clearly what her amulet is. It's a vessel for some kind of power, maybe Magica herself. That's the ark that she's being brought before. But in the closed captioning, they spelled it A-R-C. Now, highly plausible that that's just a mistake on the part of the captioners. It's a common misspelling. Arc with a C, which literally means a curve, but is most often used in the sense of a story arc, especially if you're talking about television. It's a much more common word than arc with a K. But it could be deliberate on the part of the episode writers, or it could be completely, accidental on their part. Or on the part of the most likely scenarios that it's an error by the closed captioners. But regardless, I still found it very funny because Magica is showing up before this arc. She's showing up before the story arc. Clearly, there's a major story arc involving her, and here she is at the beginning of it, before it. I just found that entertaining. All right, moving on. Terror of the Terrafermians. Was somebody out there just, begging for there to be another Terrafermian episode? Because I barely remember them from the original, or the old show. I remember they were in it. I remember it was an episode that showed up fairly frequently on reruns. I remember I was disappointed whenever it did. Definitely not one of my favorites. I remember virtually nothing about it except the kind of annoying voices the Terrafermians had. This kind of whining, nasal thing they had going, which, yes, I recognize the irony of that. But I guess somebody really wanted to bring them back. I don't know. I can't recall if they were in the comics. They probably were. Maybe they were handled better in the comics and somebody wanted to get them right. I don't know. Point was, they worked much better here, in very small doses. But the main thing going on in this episode is it's playing with an idea that I'm pretty sure I've mentioned before. Can't remember if it was in a Ducktales video or not. That characters are best in pairs. And this episode does a great job of taking a pretty large number of characters for this show. Basically the entire main cast, plus Lena, minus Scrooge and Donald. Which is a lot of people. And pairing them off into interesting combinations that we haven't really seen before. So we get Dewey Launchpad, where previously Launchpad had really only been seen in combination with Scrooge, I think maybe a little Donald. That's about it. So there's that. Then there's Beakley Lena, Lena, which is an interesting combination again because Lena has previously only appeared once in the prior episode, but she was heavily paired with Webby. That was kind of how her character was introduced, as this contrast to Webby and as a friend for Webby. It makes sense that she'd have interactions with Mrs. Beakley as a result, but definitely not something we've seen before, and it's the first time we've really seen Beakley interacting one-on-one with somebody other than Scrooge, Webby, or Donald. So we're getting some new sides of her. And then Webby and Huey, which kind of makes sense because we had Webby and Louie in the pilot. We had Webby and Dewey investigating. Is that right? Is it Dewey that was investigating the parents? Yes, it was. Webby and Dewey investigating what happened to Della Duck, and now we have Webby and Huey. It's interesting that she gets along really easily with the other two, but with Huey it's more of a conflict. But we'll get to that. There's a pattern across all of these pairs. Louie is there as well, but he's just kind of following along and watching, wanting to be entertained by it all. He's kind of an audience stand-in for this one. But like I was saying, there's kind of a pattern spread across these, which is that all these pairs are fundamentally disagreeing about something. Lena and Beakley have this disagreement about whether Lena and Webby should hang out, whether Lena is welcome in their group. And by the end of it, Lena convinces Beakley that yes, she should be, by saving Beakley's life. Now, Lena sells this to Magica as playing the long game. Now she's welcome. Now she's further into their group. She's infiltrated more. But Magica clearly isn't buying it, and honestly, I'm not either. I think Lena is going to turn against Magica pretty much inevitably. I don't think anybody watching, except maybe like small kids who aren't really familiar with how TV works, I don't think anybody watching is expecting Lena to stay evil. Worst case scenario is that she'll pull a Zuko. Just as we think she's about to switch sides to the good guys, she will revert and stick with Magica, and then realize she made a terrible mistake, switch sides and join the good guys. More likely is she's just going to switch sides and join the good guys. Because she's already made clear she doesn't care much for her family, including her aunt. That's that pair. Then we've got Launchpad and Dewey, which is, it's a very silly thing. It's Dewey trying to convince... Launchpad believes that Dewey is a mole monster, and is trying to convince Dewey that he is also a mole monster so that he can expose Dewey and defeat the mole monster. By the end of it, Launchpad has been introduced to this idea that maybe mole monsters aren't evil, and that he might be a mole monster, and then he completely embraces that and decides he's a mole monster, but he and Dewey are good mole monsters. Mrs. Beakley then tells him that he's not a mole monster, and he accepts that ridiculously easily. So there's a little bit of a joke there about, Launchpad won't listen to a kid, but he'll listen to somebody he sees as more of an authority. Mostly, though, it's a joke about conspiracy theory nonsense. Because through the whole thing, Launchpad is, retorting to everything Dewey says. Dewey says, I'm not a mole monster. Launchpad is like, well, that's what a mole monster would say, isn't it? And that's the problem with conspiracy thinking, is everything becomes evidence of the conspiracy. You find something that disproves the conspiracy, well, that just proves that they have hid it that well. And we got that early on with Huey and Webby. Webby says that the 818 line has been cut off for... because it's full of terra firmians. Huey is like, well, it says right there, it's closed for renovations. And Webby's response is, that's what they want you to think. Huey asks, who are they? And she replies, exactly. That's like the classic conspiracy theory exchange. They. Who are they? Well, they are simultaneously incredibly powerful, have their fingers into everything, and totally invisible. They don't exist. They are just the randomness and chaos of the universe. But the conspiracy theorist can't accept that. That's too much for them. It's much more comforting to believe that someone is in charge, even if that someone is them and malicious, than it is to believe that no one is in charge, that all this shit is just happening because it happens. So everything becomes evidence of the conspiracy. It's them. They are that powerful. You found something that disproves it, that just proves it. That proves that they are trying to hide the truth. And so on, and so on, and so on. What annoys me about this kind of thing, it's a common recurring thing in TV shows that deal with like adventure, modern fantasy, that kind of thing, where, you've got the skeptic and the believer, and they always treat it that the skeptic is closed-minded and the believer is open to the possibilities. But that's not really true. Going in, Huey has theories about what's causing it. Causing earthquakes, so on and so forth. He has theories that are grounded in reality, in science, in, other things that are known to be true. Webby is the one coming in with certainty. Webby is the one who says she knows what is going on. It's the terra firmians. They've got this prince and a rebellion and all this stuff. And it turns out that the terra firmians aren't causing earthquakes. They think the beaked monsters from above are doing it. When it's really probably what Huey said from the start. Tectonic activity. I mean, Calisota is, which is the place that Duckburg is located. Duckburg is pretty clearly in the San Francisco Bay Area. Like if you look at various hints dropped in different works, in like maps that have been shown, that kind of thing, it's on the San Francisco Bay. It basically is San Francisco. And then St. Canard is on the other side of the bay. They get earthquakes because of tectonic activity. It happens. But that's the point, is upon being confronted with the reality that they were both wrong. Huey was right about what causes earthquake, but wrong that terra firmians don't exist. Webby was wrong about what causes earthquakes, but right that the terra firmians exist. Huey takes the new knowledge, writes it down in the book, and says, yep, proven science fact, terra firmians exist. And Webby treats this as him being like stubborn and close-minded, when she has yet to admit that she was wrong about the earthquakes. He's the one who's modifying his ideas to match reality. It's my little rant about this stuff. And my camera's about to die, so 1 second, please. Okay, we're back. So, I think that about sums up everything I wanted to say about Terror of the Terra Firmians. It was, really entertaining to get to see all these different characters paired up and get to see, like, different sides of their personalities. But I don't really give a crap about Terra Firmians. Like, okay. And then the episode that kind of ticked me off. House of the Lucky Gander. And if you've been watching these for a while, you can probably guess what I didn't like about this episode, which is, this is textbook Orientalism. So let's talk about what that is. Orientalism is this way of depicting the East, which means anything east or south, honestly, of the Mediterranean. It means the Middle East and North Africa, Central and South Asia, East Asia, that whole swath of the world, came to be known as the Orient in like 18th, 19th century, thereabouts. Came to be known to Europeans as that. And it's all treated as this kind of mishmash of exotic, exciting, mysterious, dangerous places. The Indiana Jones movies are full of this attitude. The old Ducktales cartoon is dripping with this attitude. What's going on here is a combination of a few different things. One is we actually do tend to know less about cultures that are different from our own. And so there is an aspect of mystery there. There's also an attraction there because human beings are drawn to new experience and new people. We are not really built for settling in one place, even though we've been doing it for a few thousand years. There is this very commonly desire to see new places and experience new things and encounter new people. And that's a very healthy desire. But there's also the fear of the unknown, and particularly in European descended cultures, this very sharp divide between the normative and the abject. This narrow circle of what's acceptable and quote-unquote normal, and anything which deviates from it is treated as being wrong, repulsive, etc. We, as a culture, do not deal well with the idea that there can be more than one right way. And you combine all of that and you get Orientalism, where the Orient, which is a really offensive term, by the way, is treated as at once exotic and dangerous, as magical and undesirable. Or better yet, magical and inferior, because that's really how it's treated. They're not civilized like us. They're different, and different is bad, but alluring. And so that creates this idea of temptation, of danger, of hidden treasure, all this kind of stuff that gets associated with the Orient. As well as it being heavily sexualized, but that doesn't really come into play in this episode. It's a seriously problematic thing. And like I said, it was endemic in the old Ducktales. It was everywhere. In fact, they went beyond that. They went full-on hardcore racist in their depiction of East Asian people. And Middle Eastern people didn't fare much better. It was like, looking back on some of what was considered acceptable in a children's cartoon in the late 80s, early 90s, it's kind of, wow. At the same time, you get this concerted push for greater diversity, but you also get horrible stereotyping of other cultures. The two don't mesh well. So what's the problem here? Well, let's start with Scrooge's dismissiveness of Macau, or macaw, as it is in the episode, because bird joke. He just kind of dismisses it as, being utterly worthless. Nothing there is real, it's all fake, all artifice. And of course that is true of the casino. But that's the thing. The casino is this huge pile of jokes that work for Vegas really well. Or Atlantic City really well. Though Vegas is probably the better one because it's better known. Like, these are standby jokes, you know. They're typical elements of Las Vegas, that it's all artificial and glitzy and fake, and that they'll do anything to keep you in the casino, especially if you're winning, because they want you to lose before you leave, because that way they make money. That, you know, they've got all these shows and buffets and all this kind of stuff that's really just there to keep you there until you've lost as much money as possible. Nothing in that would have worked, like everything in there would have worked as well or better if the episode were in Las Vegas. Excuse me. And so that's not great. But it's not, like, in itself a huge problem, except in this dismissiveness toward another culture. Like, being dismissive of Las Vegas, well, that's the same culture as the people making the episode. They get to do that. It's a little, when it's a culture that's, you know, been subjected, like the entire rest of the world, to a couple of centuries of Western imperialism. That's kind of kicking people while they're down, you know? Even though Macau is one of the places that's built itself up really well, still. Built itself back up. It's still, that legacy is still there. It's still not cool. Just generally, making fun of yourself is okay, making fun of other people usually isn't. Unless you're clearly punching up. Making fun of people who have power over you in a very clear way is 100% okay. Then you've got Liu Han, I think was his name. And out of curiosity, I looked it up, and they clearly did do a little research. They appear to have read the Wikipedia page on Liu Han. He's associated with sea toads. His name actually means Master Sea Toad. Which I'm not quite clear on what a sea toad is, because I thought toads lived on land and frogs lived in water. I thought that was the difference, but apparently not. What do I know? Yes, he's associated with sea toads. Yes, he is a god of, or an aspect of the god of wealth, who is closely associated, the Liu Han aspect in particular is associated with luck. You know what he isn't? Is an ancient vampire. Couldn't find any trace of that. That's something the show made up, which is to say the show took a real figure in real religion that is followed by real people and said, no, actually it's an evil monster. Which there's kind of a history of that, because one of the things Christian missionaries liked to do was claim that wherever they went, claim that the local gods were actually demons that had tricked the populace, which, if you can't see how that's staggeringly disrespectful of the people you're coming to, yeah, it is. You're saying that you know the real truth and these people have been duped. I mean, that kind of comes down to why I don't think highly of missionaries. It's just religious imperialism. It's religion. It's a religion trying to conquer the world and destroy all others, and I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with anybody doing that, a religion included. So that's a problem, and it's a problem that's calling to a real historical thing that people did, you know. it's vilifying another culture's gods, which is a step in vilifying that culture. And you're also saying that that culture, they've already said that that culture is fake and, artificial and not real. And then on top of that, you get the cricket at the end, which turns out that that story of the wonders of that cricket were overblown. So again, tying into this theme of, this culture, these cultures aren't what they're cracked up to be. They're lesser. And then you throw in Launchpad's off-screen adventure, which is again part of exotifying the culture. This lost love that he has some kind of a mysterious adventure with, and then he comes back with a panda baby and wearing samurai armor that's full of arrows. It's again doing that mishmash of cultures, treating them, because they're far away, they can all be treated as being interchangeable. No, that's not how it works. Not to mention that, why would he be wearing 400-year-old armor for an adventure in the modern day? Again, it's far away, we can mash all their history together too. It doesn't really matter because it's one of those cultures, They're just there to add spice to our stories. That's not okay. And it's especially not okay in a kid's show. Representation is important, but it has to be done well. And it's all the more important to get it right when you're showing this to kids, because they're less set in their ways, their attitudes are more flexible. I'm not even talking about it's going to teach them bad lessons or anything like that, although, it may well. I'm just thinking of you've got the little kid from, maybe they're even from Macau, and they're liking this show, but then they watch this episode, and how's it going to make them feel? Maybe they've got a statue of Liu Han, or have heard stories of Liu Han, and then they get this really different depiction that dismisses him as a demon. That's not okay, Liu Han is not a vampire. He's a god. Neither of those things exist, but Liu Han is one and not the other. And it's not okay to tell people that their gods are actually demons. That's what it comes down to. It's not okay to tell people that their culture is worthless. It's not okay to tell people that their culture, it has value only as something to spice up an adventure. And that's essentially what this episode is doing. So yeah, I'm not a fan of this most recent one. I mean, the core story of it, Gladstone Gander, insufferable git, Donald, constant horrible look, putting them together. Again, it's that pairing of contrasting characters thing. I mean, that works well. And Donald getting steadily more frustrated until he finally snaps and wins. That's a solid Donald Duck story. It's one that's been done a lot, but not one that's been animated that much. But all the other baggage they saddled it with, when they could have just put it in Vegas, that just kind of ruins it for me. But, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. They had 2 really solid episodes in this chunk. Particularly, the Terraformian one. Despite my antipathy toward Terraformians, was a solid character episode that did a great job with an ensemble cast. The show is still running strong. I just hope they do a better job of avoiding the Orientalism well that both the old show and the Scrooge comics dipped into a lot. And even the pilot had a little of it too. But they've mostly avoided it. This is the first episode where it's really come back, and so hopefully they can continue avoiding it in the future. I think that's about it. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. As always, somewhere here or here there should be a Patreon link. So if you want to see more of these in advance, you can see it there, as well as seeing lots of other goodies that I have there. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!